What happens when the truth about a baby's origins arrives not in a whisper, but in a thick envelope stamped with the seal of the court? How far can you push a husband before he stops fighting and simply, methodically, removes you from his life? The day legal documents arrived at my door was the day I realized my version of honesty had finally rewritten my whole family. I'm Lira Veylin, 34 years old, and I work as a medical office administrator at Riverside Family Practice. For the past 6 months, I've been living what I thought was my perfect life. Finally pregnant, with the baby I'd always imagined, married to a good man, with a beautiful 6-year-old daughter named Mira from my previous relationship. Everything should have been perfect. But perfection, I've learned, has a way of unraveling when it's built on lies. The kitchen smelled of garlic and rosemary from the chicken I'd been roasting when Ewan walked through the front door that Tuesday evening. My husband of 3 years moved with his usual quiet precision, hanging his jacket on the hook by the door, placing his keys in the small ceramic bowl Mira had made in art class. At 36, Ewan was the kind of man who noticed details, a trait that had initially attracted me and was now making my stomach clench with anxiety. "How was work?" I asked, stirring the sauce with more vigor than necessary. The wooden spoon clinked against the pot's edge, a nervous rhythm that filled the silence. "Fine." His voice carried that distant tone I'd been hearing more frequently. Dr. Patterson had me review the Morrison account again. 3rd time this month. Ewan worked as a senior accountant at Patterson & Associates, handling medical practice finances. It was steady work, reliable. Everything about my husband was reliable. That reliability was exactly why I'd married him, and exactly why I couldn't let him discover what I'd done. "That's good, right? Shows they trust you." I turned to face him, forcing a bright smile. At 20 weeks pregnant, my belly was just starting to show prominently, and I caught Ewan's eyes lingering there, with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Lira," he said slowly, "I need to ask you something." My hand stilled on the spoon. "What's that?" "The timeline doesn't add up." He pulled out his phone, swiping to what looked like a calendar app. "You said you got pregnant in early March, but that would put conception around February 22nd. I was in Chicago that entire week for the Patterson conference. Remember, you were upset because I missed Mira's school play rehearsal." The kitchen suddenly felt too warm. I could hear Mira upstairs, her feet thumping across the hardwood floors of her bedroom. Normal sounds of normal life, while my world threatened to tilt off its axis. "Ewan, honey, you're overthinking this." I moved closer to him, placing my hand on his arm. "Conception dates are estimates. Dr. Martinez explained that the timing can be off by a week or 2 easily." His dark eyes studied my face with an intensity that made me want to look away. "A week or 2, maybe, but this is almost 10 days, Lira. And you were so specific about when you thought it happened. You even circled the date on the kitchen calendar, February 22nd. I remember because you drew little hearts around it." I had done that. In my excitement about finally being pregnant, I'd marked the date I'd gone to the clinic, thinking it would be romantic to commemorate our conception date. Now that romantic gesture was threatening to destroy everything. "You're being paranoid," I said, pulling my hand back. "Stress can make you see problems that aren't there. Maybe you should talk to someone about this anxiety." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I needed him to stop asking questions. Ewan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a tell I'd learned to recognize over our years together. "I'm not anxious, Lira. I'm confused. There's a difference." "Mommy, is dinner ready?" Mira bounded into the kitchen, her dark curls bouncing around her shoulders. She was the perfect blend of my features and her biological father's, though she'd never known Jonas as anything more than Mommy's friend from before. "Almost, sweetheart." I turned back to the stove, grateful for the interruption. "Why don't you set the table?" As Mira gathered plates from the cabinet, chattering about her day at school, I felt Ewan's gaze still fixed on me. The weight of his suspicion pressed against my shoulders like a physical thing. After dinner, while Mira watched cartoons in the living room, Ewan disappeared into his home office. I could hear the soft clicking of his keyboard, the occasional rustle of papers. He was researching something. I knew his work habits well enough to recognize the focused intensity of his typing pattern. I was loading the dishwasher when my phone buzzed with a text from Helena, my best friend since college. Helena, coffee tomorrow? I need to hear all the pregnancy updates. Me, can't wait. Need some girl talk. Helena, everything okay? You sound stressed. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Helena had been encouraging throughout my fertility struggles, even when I'd told her about my plan to use Jonas's sample. She'd said I deserved to have the baby I'd always dreamed of, that sometimes women had to take control of their own destinies. Me, just tired, pregnancy hormones, you know. Helena. Ewan still being weird about the timing. My blood went cold. I'd confided in Helena about Ewan's questions, but seeing it spelled out in text made it feel more real, more dangerous. Me. He'll get over it. Men don't understand how conception works. Helena. Exactly. See you at 10 at the usual place. I deleted the conversation thread and slipped my phone into my pocket. In the living room, Mira was curled up on the couch with her favorite stuffed elephant, giggling at some cartoon. This was what I'd wanted. A family. A home filled with laughter and love. I'd done what I had to do to make that happen. The sound of Ewan's office door opening made me look up. He walked into the kitchen with a piece of paper in his hand, his expression unreadable. "What's that?" I asked, though something in my chest already knew. "I was organizing our tax documents for next year," he said quietly. "Found this in your purse last week when I was looking for the car registration. Forgot about it until tonight." He placed the paper on the kitchen counter between us. It was a receipt from Clearwater Fertility Clinic, dated February 22nd. The same date I'd circled on our calendar with little hearts. My mouth went dry. "I can explain." "Can you?" His voice remained calm, but I could see the hurt flickering behind his eyes. "Because I'm really hoping you can, Lira. I'm hoping there's some reasonable explanation for why my wife was at a fertility clinic on a day when I was 800 miles away, and why she never mentioned it." Mira's laughter drifted in from the living room, an innocent soundtrack to the moment my marriage began to crumble. "It's not what you think," I said, the lie forming even as I spoke it. "I went for a consultation. About my irregular periods. I was going to tell you, but then I found out I was pregnant naturally, and it didn't seem important anymore." Ewan picked up the receipt, studying it with the same attention to detail he brought to his accounting work. "This shows a payment for specimen storage and processing. That's not a consultation fee, Lira." The kitchen felt like it was shrinking around us. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, could feel sweat gathering at the base of my neck despite the evening chill. "You're misreading it," I said desperately. "Medical billing is complicated. You know that from your work." For a long moment, Ewan just looked at me. Then he folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. "Maybe I am," he said finally. "Maybe I'm misreading everything." But the way he said it, with that quiet, measured tone, told me he wasn't buying my explanation. And worse, it told me he was done fighting about it tonight. Ewan never escalated arguments. He processed information, gathered evidence, and then acted decisively. As he walked past me toward the stairs, he paused. "Lira, next time you want to lie to me, you might want to remember that I spend 40 hours a week analyzing financial discrepancies. It's literally what I'm trained to notice." I stood alone in the kitchen, one hand unconsciously moving to my growing belly, and realized that my carefully constructed perfect life was beginning to show cracks I might not be able to repair. The next morning, I arrived at Cafe Luna 15 minutes early, hoping to collect my thoughts before Helena arrived. The familiar warmth of the coffee shop, with its mismatched furniture and local art covering the walls, usually calmed me. But today, even the cheerful chatter of other customers felt overwhelming. I'd barely slept after Ewan's discovery of the receipt. He'd gone to bed without another word, lying on his side of the mattress with his back to me, the space between us feeling like a canyon. This morning, he'd left for work before I woke up, leaving only a note saying he'd pick up Mira from school. Helena swept through the cafe entrance at exactly 10 o'clock, her red hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. At 32, she had the kind of confident energy that had always made me feel both inspired and slightly inadequate. She worked in marketing for a downtown firm and had opinions about everything. "You look terrible," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "And I mean that with love." "Thanks," I muttered, wrapping my hands around my coffee mug. Just what every pregnant woman wants to hear. Helena signaled the barista for her usual, a large cappuccino with an extra shot, and leaned forward with the focused attention she usually reserved for her most important clients. "Okay. Spill. What's Ewan done now?" I'd been dreading this conversation, but I needed someone on my side. Helena had supported my decision to use Jonas's sample when Ewan and I had been struggling to conceive. She'd been the one to encourage me when I'd wavered, reminding me that I deserved to have the family I'd always wanted. "He found the clinic receipt," I said quietly. Helena's eyes widened. "The one from February? I thought you'd gotten rid of all that paperwork." "I thought I had too. It was in my purse, mixed in with other stuff. He found it when he was looking for something else." "What did you tell him?" "That it was for a consultation about my periods, that I got pregnant naturally after that." The lie sounded even weaker, spoken aloud in the bright cafe atmosphere. Helena was quiet for a moment, stirring her cappuccino with more attention than it required. "And he believed you?" "No." The admission felt like a weight lifting off my chest and settling onto my shoulders simultaneously. "He's an accountant, Helena. He notices details, inconsistencies. The receipt showed payment for specimen processing, not a consultation." "Shit." Helena sat back in her chair. "Okay, but he can't prove anything, right? I mean, technically, you did have a medical procedure. The details of that procedure are protected by privacy laws." This was why I'd needed to talk to Helena. She had a way of finding solutions, of making problems seem manageable. "I don't think he's going to let this go," I said. "You should have seen the way he looked at me, like he was seeing a stranger." "Ewan's always been dramatic about trust issues," Helena said dismissively. "Remember when you first started dating and he got upset because you didn't mention your lunch with your ex-coworker? He'll calm down once he realizes he's being ridiculous." Before I could respond, I heard familiar voices approaching our table. Paul Veylin, Ewan's older brother, was walking toward us with his wife Jennifer and their twin 8-year-old boys. Paul was a construction foreman, built like Ewan, but broader, with the kind of direct manner that came from managing construction crews. "Lira! Helena!" Jennifer called out, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. "What a nice surprise." Paul's greeting was more reserved, though not unfriendly. "How are you feeling? Ewan mentioned you've been having some morning sickness." "Much better now," I said, forcing a smile. "Second trimester is supposed to be easier." "That's what Jennifer always said." Paul's expression was neutral, but something in his tone made me wonder what Ewan had told him about our recent conversations. Helena, never one to let an awkward silence develop, jumped in with questions about the twins' Little League season, and soon we were joined by Paul and Jennifer at our small table. The boys ran off to the cafe's small play area, their voices adding to the general din. "So," Jennifer said, settling into her chair, "Ewan seemed a little stressed when we saw him last weekend. Everything okay at home?" I felt Helena's eyes on me, a silent reminder to control the narrative. "Oh, you know how he gets," I said with a laugh that sounded forced even to my own ears. "Work has been intense, and I think he's just nervous about becoming a dad again. Men get anxious about these things differently than women do. Paul's eyebrows rose slightly. Ewan's always been good with Mira. I wouldn't think he'd be nervous about another kid. It's different when it's biologically yours, I said, then immediately regretted the phrasing. Paul and Jennifer had adopted their twins after years of fertility struggles. Right, Jennifer said quietly, her smile becoming strained. Helena jumped in quickly. What Lira means is that Ewan's probably just overthinking everything. You know how analytical he is. I bet he's already calculating college tuition costs and researching the best preschools. Actually, Paul said slowly, when we talked last weekend, he seemed more concerned about medical timelines than college planning. My stomach clenched. Medical timelines? Something about conception dates not matching up with his travel schedule. He asked me if I remembered exactly when he was in Chicago for that conference. Paul was watching my face carefully now. I told him it was definitely the week of February 20th through the 24th, because Jennifer and I had planned to visit that weekend and had to reschedule. The cafe noise seemed to fade into the background. I could feel Helena's tension beside me, could see Jennifer's confused expression as she looked between Paul and me. Ewan's just being paranoid, I said, aiming for a light tone. I keep telling him that conception dating isn't an exact science. Dr. Martinez explained that there can be variations. 2 weeks, though, Paul asked. That seems like a pretty significant variation. Helena leaned forward, her marketing instincts kicking in. Paul, you're making this sound way more dramatic than it is. Lira and Ewan are having a baby. That should be cause for celebration, not interrogation. Paul's expression hardened slightly. I'm not interrogating anyone, Helena. I'm concerned about my brother, who seems genuinely confused about something that should be straightforward. Maybe Ewan should focus on being supportive instead of playing detective, Helena shot back. Lyra's dealing with pregnancy hormones and stress, and the last thing she needs is her husband questioning her about medical details. Jennifer looked increasingly uncomfortable. Maybe we should... You know what? I interrupted, feeling cornered and desperate to regain control. You're right, Helena. I'm tired of tiptoeing around Ewan's anxiety. I'm the one carrying this baby. I'm the one who went through months of fertility stress while he buried himself in work. Now that we're finally pregnant, he wants to analyze it like one of his accounting spreadsheets, instead of just being happy. The words tumbled out louder than I'd intended, drawing glances from other cafe patrons. Paul's expression shifted from concern to something colder. Lira, he said quietly, Ewan worked extra hours last year specifically so you could cut back your schedule and focus on trying to get pregnant. He rearranged his entire travel calendar around your cycle. If he's asking questions now, maybe it's because something genuinely doesn't make sense to him. Or maybe, Helena said sharply, he's being controlling and making Lira feel guilty for finally getting what she's always wanted. The tension at our table was becoming impossible to ignore. Jennifer was gathering her purse, clearly ready to leave, while Paul's jaw was set in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of Ewan's expression the night before. I think, Paul said, standing up, I should probably check in with my brother and see how he's really doing. As Paul and Jennifer collected their boys and left, Helena reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Don't let them get in your head, she said. Paul's always been protective of Ewan, and Jennifer's probably just jealous that you got pregnant when they couldn't. You did what you had to do to have this baby. That's not something you need to apologize for. But as I watched Paul's family walk away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made things significantly worse. Paul would definitely tell Ewan about this conversation, and my defensive reaction would only fuel more suspicions. My phone buzzed with a text message. Jonas, we need to talk. Can you meet me after work today? My blood went cold. Jonas Ashcroft, my ex-boyfriend and the biological father of the baby I was carrying, worked as an IVF technician at Clearwater Fertility Clinic. He'd been reluctant to help me from the beginning, agreeing only after I'd convinced him that Ewan would never need to know the truth. Me, Can't today. Is everything okay? Jonas: No, everything is not okay. This was a mistake, Lira. A huge mistake. Helena: What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I showed her the messages. Helena's expression shifted from concern to alarm. He's getting cold feet, she said. You need to meet with him and make sure he doesn't do anything stupid. Like what? Like telling Ewan the truth. The cafe around us continued its normal rhythm. Customers ordering coffee, friends laughing at nearby tables, the barista calling out names for pickup orders. Normal life proceeding while mine threatened to implode. Jonas wouldn't do that, I said, but even as I spoke the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. Helena was already pulling out her phone. I'm cancelling my afternoon meetings. We're going to figure this out. As she typed rapidly, I stared out the cafe window at the street beyond. Somewhere across town, Ewan was at his office, probably analysing financial reports with the same methodical attention he was now turning toward the inconsistencies in my story. And Jonas, who had helped me get pregnant with the baby I'd always imagined, was apparently having second thoughts about keeping our secret. I placed my hand over my growing belly and realised that the life I'd fought so hard to create was starting to unravel faster than I could control. By Thursday, the tension in our house had become suffocating. Ewan moved through our daily routines with polite distance, making coffee for both of us in the morning, asking about my doctor's appointment, helping Mira with her homework. But underneath the veneer of normalcy, I could feel him watching, analysing, gathering pieces of a puzzle I desperately needed him to stop solving. I was at my desk at Riverside Family Practice, trying to focus on insurance claims, when Dr. Camilla Red appeared beside my workstation. At 54, Dr. Red was the kind of physician who noticed everything, a trait that made her excellent with patients and occasionally uncomfortable for staff members who preferred to fly under the radar. Lira, do you have a moment? Her tone was professional but carried an undertone that made my stomach tighten. Of course. I saved my work and followed her into her private office, a small space made smaller by towering stacks of medical journals and patient files. Dr. Red closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit in the chair across from her desk. She pulled out a manila folder that looked ominously thick. I've been reviewing our medical record system, she began, and I've found some inconsistencies in your personal file that I need to discuss with you. My mouth went dry. Inconsistencies? Your pregnancy timeline, for one thing. According to your last recorded visit here, you had a pregnancy test on March 15th that came back positive. Based on standard dating, that would put conception around late February or early March. She opened the folder and pulled out several papers. But I also have records showing that you requested copies of your complete medical history on February 10th, specifically your fertility workup from last year. I forced myself to maintain eye contact. I wanted to be prepared in case we needed to see a specialist again. That would make sense, Dr. Red said slowly, except that you also had me write a letter of referral to Clearwater Fertility Clinic on February 18th. A referral you never mentioned to me again, and a clinic that never sent us any follow-up reports. The office felt too warm. I could hear the muffled sounds of the busy practice beyond the door. Phones ringing, patients checking in, the normal sounds of a workplace where I'd felt comfortable and secure until this moment. I decided not to pursue the referral, I said. Ewan and I talked about it and decided to try naturally for a few more months. Dr. Red was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers in front of her. Lira, I've been practicing medicine for 28 years. I've seen every kind of fertility struggle, every kind of family planning decision. I don't judge patients for their choices, but I do need accurate information in their medical records. I don't understand what you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking directly, did you undergo any medical procedures at Clearwater Fertility Clinic? The question hung in the air between us. Dr. Red's expression was neither accusatory nor sympathetic, just professionally expectant. I realized that this was likely not the first time she'd had to navigate a situation where a patient's story didn't align with the medical evidence. I had some consultations, I said carefully. Nothing that required follow-up here. Consultations that resulted in pregnancy. I got pregnant naturally. The timing was just coincidental. Dr. Red made a note in my file. I see. Well, for the sake of proper prenatal care, I'll need complete records from Clearwater if you had any procedures there. Certain fertility treatments can impact pregnancy management, and I want to make sure we're monitoring you appropriately. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. That's not necessary. Like I said, I got pregnant naturally. Lira? Dr. Red's voice became gentler but more direct. I received a call yesterday from Dr. Sarah Chen at Clearwater. She mentioned that one of their patients, you, might need coordinated care during pregnancy. She seemed to be under the impression that you'd undergone IVF procedures with donor material. The room seemed to tilt. That must be a mistake. A mix-up with another patient. Is it? Dr. Red leaned forward. Because if you did use donor material, there are genetic screening considerations we need to discuss. And if you used a known donor, there are additional medical history factors that could be relevant. I stood up abruptly. I think there's been some kind of administrative error. I'll call Clearwater and get it sorted out. Lira, wait. Dr. Red's voice stopped me at the door. Whatever decisions you've made about your family planning, my job is to take care of you and your baby. But I can't do that effectively if I don't have accurate information. You have accurate information, I said, my hand on the door handle. I'm 20 weeks pregnant, the baby is healthy, and everything is proceeding normally. As I left her office, I could feel Dr. Red's concerned gaze following me. I made it back to my desk and sat down heavily, my hands shaking as I tried to look busy with paperwork. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonas. Jonas, did Dr. Chen call your doctor? She said she was going to coordinate care. Me, we need to talk, now. Jonas, I can't leave work. Meet me at the clinic after 6. Me, this is getting out of control. Jonas, I know, that's what I've been trying to tell you. I stared at the message thread, feeling walls closing in from every direction. Ewan was asking questions I couldn't answer. Dr. Red was demanding medical records I couldn't provide. And Jonas, who had helped me make this happen, was apparently having conversations with other medical professionals that were creating new problems. The afternoon crawled by. I made mistakes on insurance forms that I'd been processing correctly for 3 years. I accidentally transferred a patient call to the wrong department twice. By 5 o'clock, I was exhausted and anxious, and I still had to face Jonas. Clearwater Fertility Clinic was located in a modern medical complex about 20 minutes from my office. I'd been there several times over the past year, first for consultations with Ewan, then later for the procedure that had finally given me the pregnancy I'd wanted. The building's clean lines and glass facades had once represented hope to me. Now they felt ominous. Jonas was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his Honda Civic with his arms crossed. At 35, he still looked much like he had when we'd dated 5 years ago. Tall and lean, with dark hair that never quite stayed in place, and the kind of serious expression that had initially attracted me to him. This has to stop, Lira, he said without preamble as I approached. What has to stop? All of it. The lies, the cover-up, the pretending that what we did was okay. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from our relationship. Dr. Chen is asking questions about why there's no partner consent form on file. She's talking about reporting irregularities to the medical board. My stomach dropped. What kind of irregularities? The kind where a married woman uses donor material without her husband's knowledge or consent. The kind that could cost me my license and land both of us in legal trouble. You said it would be fine, I said desperately. You said you could handle the paperwork, that no one would ask questions. I was wrong. Jonas looked exhausted. I was wrong about a lot of things. I should never have agreed to help you. We stood in the parking lot as evening settled around us, the weight of our shared secret pressing down like a physical thing. Other medical professionals were leaving the building, heading home to their families, their normal lives unburdened by the kind of deception that was now threatening to destroy mine. "Jonas, please," I said quietly. "I'm 20 weeks pregnant. This baby, this is everything I've wanted. You know how long I struggled to get pregnant with Ewan. You know how much this means to me." "And what about what it means to Ewan?" Jonas's voice was sharp. "He's a good guy, Lira. He doesn't deserve this. He'll never have to know. We just need to get through the next few months and then..." "And then what? You raise his child while lying to him every day for the rest of your life? You think that's fair to anyone? Ewan, the baby, even you?" I didn't have an answer for that. I'd been so focused on getting pregnant, on finally having the family I'd envisioned, that I hadn't fully considered the long-term implications of the deception. "It's too late now," I said finally. "The baby is already here, growing, real. We can't undo that." Jonas was quiet for a long moment, staring across the parking lot at the medical building where he worked. "Dr. Chen wants to meet with you next week," he said finally. "She's going to ask for Ewan's consent forms, and when you can't provide them, she's going to start asking harder questions. Then we'll figure out what to tell her." "No." Jonas looked at me directly. "We won't. I'm done lying, Lira. I'm done covering for you. If Dr. Chen asks me direct questions about what happened, I'm going to tell her the truth." The parking lot seemed to spin around me. "You can't do that." "I can, and I will. I should have done it months ago." He pulled his car keys from his pocket. "I'm sorry, Lira. I really am. But I won't lose my career to protect a lie that's hurting everyone involved." As Jonas drove away, I stood alone in the darkening parking lot, one hand pressed against my growing belly. The baby kicked, a strong flutter that had thrilled me just that morning. Now it felt like a reminder of how much I had to lose. My phone rang. "Ewan." "Hey," I answered, trying to sound normal. "Where are you? Mira's asking about dinner and you're usually home by now." "Just running some errands. I'll be home in 30 minutes. "Okay. Lira?" His voice carried a strange note I couldn't identify. "Yeah?" "We need to talk tonight, after Mira goes to bed." The line went dead, leaving me standing in the empty parking lot, with the growing certainty that my carefully constructed world was about to collapse entirely. Saturday evening, Lira Veylin stood in our kitchen, methodically arranging flowers in a vase, while casting disapproving glances in my direction. Ewan's mother had always been polite to me, but tonight her usual warmth was notably absent. At 62, Iris had the kind of refined bearing that came from 30 years of teaching high school English, and she wielded silence like a weapon when she was displeased. "The roast smells wonderful, dear," she said to Ewan, completely ignoring the fact that I'd been the one cooking for the past 3 hours. We were hosting dinner for Ewan's family, Iris, Paul, and Jennifer, and their twins. What should have been a pleasant family gathering felt more like a tribunal, with me as the unwilling defendant. Mira was setting the dining room table, carefully placing napkins beside each plate with the serious concentration she brought to important tasks. She'd been excited about the family dinner all week, chattering about showing her cousins the new art supplies Ewan had bought her. "Mom, could you help me with the wine?" Ewan asked Iris, though I noticed he didn't suggest I help instead, despite it being my dinner party. Paul and Jennifer arrived precisely at 6, their boys immediately racing upstairs with Mira to see her room. The adults gathered in the living room, making small talk that felt forced and careful. "Lira, you're glowing," Jennifer said, though her smile seemed strained. "How are you feeling?" "Much better now that I'm in the second trimester," I replied, settling into the armchair that had become my preferred spot. "The morning sickness was pretty brutal for a while." "I remember that phase," Iris said coolly, "though some women find that stress can make pregnancy symptoms worse." The comment hung in the air like smoke. I caught Paul and Ewan exchanging a look that confirmed my suspicion that they'd been talking about me. Actually, I said, deciding to take control of the narrative before it spiraled further. I've been feeling great lately. Really excited about expanding our family. That's wonderful, Jennifer said, but her enthusiasm felt forced. Ewan must be thrilled. I looked at my husband, expecting him to confirm his excitement, but he just nodded silently, his expression unreadable. You know, I continued, feeling compelled to fill the uncomfortable silence. It's funny how much worry and stress can affect fertility. Ewan and I struggled for so long to get pregnant, and I think part of the problem was that we were both so anxious about it. Once I learned to relax and take control of the situation, everything fell into place. Paul's eyebrows rose. Take control how? The question felt loaded, dangerous. Just being more proactive about my health, tracking my cycles more carefully, making sure I was doing everything possible to optimize our chances. Iris said, her tone neutral but somehow skeptical. And this was all while Ewan was traveling so much for work. My stomach clenched. Well, yes, but we worked around his schedule. Must have been challenging, Paul said, considering he was gone for that entire week in February when you got pregnant. The room fell completely silent except for the sound of the children playing upstairs. I could feel everyone's attention focused on me, waiting for my response. Like I've explained to Ewan, I said, forcing a laugh, conception dating isn't an exact science. The timing can vary. By 2 weeks? Iris asked sharply. That seems like quite a variation. I felt cornered, attacked by people who should have been supporting me. Why is everyone so focused on dates and timelines? I'm pregnant, we're happy, isn't that what matters? Of course that's what matters, Jennifer said quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. But Paul wasn't backing down. I think what matters is honesty, Lira, especially in a marriage. Are you suggesting I'm being dishonest? I stood up, my voice rising. Are you seriously questioning my integrity about my own pregnancy? Paul, Ewan said quietly, maybe we should... No, I interrupted, my emotions finally boiling over. I want to hear what your brother is accusing me of. Because that's what this is, isn't it? An accusation. Paul looked at Ewan, then back at me. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying that the timeline doesn't make sense. And when timelines don't make sense, there's usually a reason. The reason is that you don't understand how conception works. I was shouting now, months of stress and fear erupting into anger. None of you understand what I've been through, what I've sacrificed to give this family the baby we all wanted. What you've sacrificed? Iris's voice was ice cold. What exactly have you sacrificed, Lira? The question stopped me short. In my anger, I'd revealed more than I'd intended. I meant the emotional stress, the medical appointments, the... Mom, why are you yelling? Mira stood in the doorway, her face worried and confused. Behind her, Paul's twins peered around the corner with wide eyes. The sight of the children broke the spell of anger that had overtaken the room. I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I said to Mira. The grown-ups were just having a disagreement. It's not your fault. Ewan stood up and walked over to the children. Why don't you guys go wash up for dinner? We'll eat in a few minutes. As the kids disappeared back upstairs, the adults sat in uncomfortable silence. I could feel tears threatening, a combination of pregnancy hormones and genuine despair. I think, Iris said finally, that this family needs to have some honest conversations. About what? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. About what's really going on here. She looked directly at me, because something is very wrong, and pretending otherwise isn't helping anyone. Ewan returned to the living room and sat down heavily on the couch. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked genuinely defeated. I've been trying to give you the benefit of the doubt, Lira, he said quietly. I've been hoping there was some explanation that would make sense of all the inconsistencies. There is an explanation, I said desperately. I've told you. You've told me lies. His voice was calm but final. I know they're lies. You know they're lies. And now my whole family knows they're lies. Paul leaned forward. Ewan, what are you going to do? My husband was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his expression was resolved in a way that terrified me. I'm going to find out the truth, he said. All of it. And then I'm going to decide what to do with that information. Ewan, please, I said, reaching for his hand. Can't we just focus on the baby? On our family? Does it really matter exactly when or how I got pregnant? He pulled his hand away gently but firmly. Yes, Lira, it matters. Because if you can lie to me about something this fundamental, then I don't know what else you've lied about, and I can't build a life with someone I can't trust. Iris stood up, gathering her purse. I think we should postpone dinner. The children don't need to be exposed to this tension. As Ewan's family prepared to leave, I sat in my chair, feeling like I was watching my life disintegrate in real time. Paul stopped beside Ewan on his way out. Call me if you need anything, he said quietly. Anything at all. After they left, Ewan went upstairs to help Mira get ready for bed, leaving me alone in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of what was supposed to be a pleasant family dinner. The flowers Iris had arranged sat wilting in their vase, and the dining room table remained set for a meal that would never be eaten. I placed my hand over my belly, feeling the baby's movements. This child was supposed to complete our family, supposed to be the answer to all our struggles. Instead, it was becoming the thing that tore us apart. When Ewan came back downstairs, he walked past the living room without looking at me and went into his office. I could hear him on the phone, his voice too low to make out the words, but the tone was serious and purposeful. I knew, with a certainty that made my chest tight with panic, that my husband was no longer just suspicious. He was taking action, and whatever he was planning, it was going to change everything. Monday morning brought a cold front that seemed to mirror the chill that had settled over our house. Ewan left for work without his usual goodbye kiss, and Mira asked me over breakfast why Daddy seemed sad. He's just stressed about work, honey, I told her, though we both knew it was more than that. At the office, I couldn't concentrate on anything. Dr. Red had been watching me with increasing concern, and I'd overheard her on a phone call that seemed to be about coordinating care with another medical facility. Every time my phone rang, I expected it to be someone asking questions I couldn't answer. Around noon, Helena called. We need to meet, she said without preamble. Something's happening. What do you mean? I mean your husband was at Patterson and Associates this morning, asking questions about family law attorneys. My friend Michelle works there, and she said he was very specific about needing someone who specializes in divorce and custody cases. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known things were bad, but hearing that Ewan was actually consulting lawyers made it real in a way that terrified me. Are you sure? I asked weakly. Michelle said he had a folder with him, a thick one, and he asked specifically about attorneys who handle cases involving deception about paternity. I hung up the phone and rushed to the bathroom, where I barely made it to a stall before throwing up. Whether it was morning sickness or panic, I couldn't tell. When I returned to my desk, there was a message from Dr. Chen at Clearwater Fertility Clinic asking me to call her back urgently. My hand shook as I dialed the number. Mrs. Veylin, thank you for calling back, Dr. Chen said. I need to discuss some irregularities in your file. What kind of irregularities? I've been reviewing your case, and I can't locate the required consent forms from your husband. Our records show that you underwent IVF with donor material, but we don't have Mr. Veylin's signature on any of the necessary paperwork. I closed my eyes, feeling the walls closing in. There might have been some administrative confusion. Mrs. Veylin, I need you to understand how serious this is. Using donor material without spousal consent is not just an ethical violation. It's potentially illegal. I need you to come in this week so we can sort this out. I can't this week. I'm very busy with work. Then I'll need to speak with your husband directly. Can you provide me with his contact information? No. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. I mean, that's not necessary. I'll handle this. There was a long pause. Mrs. Veylin, if you can't provide proper consent documentation by Friday, I'll have no choice but to report this matter to the medical board and possibly to legal authorities. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in horror. I was trapped between Jonas, who was threatening to tell the truth, Dr. Chen, who was demanding documentation I couldn't provide, and Ewan, who was apparently consulting divorce attorneys. That evening, I arrived home to find Ewan in his office, with papers spread across his desk. The door was open, but he was so focused on his work that he didn't notice me standing in the doorway. I could see spreadsheets, printed emails, and what looked like a timeline with dates highlighted in different colors. At the center of it all was a folder labeled Custody Assets, Final Draft. My heart stopped. This wasn't just research anymore. Ewan was actively preparing for divorce. "What is all this?" I asked, stepping into the office. Ewan looked up, his expression completely calm. "Documentation." "Documentation of what?" "Of everything that doesn't add up about your pregnancy. The dates, the medical appointments, the financial records." He gestured to the papers. "I've been thorough." I moved closer to the desk, trying to see what he'd compiled. There were bank statements with highlighted charges to Clearwater Fertility Clinic, printed copies of my work schedule showing the days I'd called in sick, and what looked like phone records. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been investigating discrepancies in my own life," he corrected. "Everything here is information I had legal access to. Joint bank accounts, shared phone plans, public records." I picked up one of the papers, a timeline that showed my claimed conception date, his travel schedule, my medical appointments, and the dates of various financial transactions. It was methodical, thorough, and damning. "Ewan, please. We can work this out. We don't need lawyers and investigations and—" "Yes, we do." He stood up, his voice still eerily calm. "Because you've lied to me about the most fundamental aspect of our marriage. You've made me believe I was going to be a father when apparently I'm not. And you've done it all while making me feel like I was crazy for asking questions." "You are going to be a father," I said desperately. "This baby will be yours in every way that matters. Except biologically, except honestly, except in the ways that apparently matter most to you, since you went to such elaborate lengths to ensure this baby would have someone else's DNA." The accusation hung between us like a blade. I realized there was no point in continuing to deny what he'd already figured out. "How long have you known?" I asked quietly. "I've suspected for weeks. I've known for certain since yesterday, when I called Clearwater Fertility Clinic directly and spoke with Dr. Chen." My legs gave out and I sank into the chair across from his desk. "She told you?" "She told me that my wife had undergone IVF procedures without my knowledge or consent, using donor material from an unidentified source. She also told me that this constitutes a serious ethical and legal violation that she's required to report." I stared at the papers scattered across his desk, evidence of my deception laid out with the same precision he brought to his accounting work. "Who is he, Lira?" The question was quiet, but it carried the weight of our entire marriage. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Who is the biological father of the child you're carrying?" I couldn't meet his eyes. "Jonas Ashcroft." Ewan was silent for a long moment. "Your ex-boyfriend, the one who works at the fertility clinic?" "Yes." "The one you told me you hadn't spoken to in years?" "Yes." He sat back down heavily, as if the confirmation had physically drained him. "So, not only did you lie about the conception, you've been in contact with your ex-boyfriend throughout our marriage. You planned this with him, used his genetic material, and then came home and let me believe I was going to be a father." When he put it like that, the full scope of my deception became clear even to me. I'd betrayed him on multiple levels, violated his trust in ways that went far beyond a simple lie. "I wanted a baby so badly," I whispered. "We'd been trying for so long, and nothing was working, and I wanted to give us the family we'd always talked about. The family you wanted, he corrected. This was never about us, Lira. This was about you getting what you wanted, regardless of how it affected anyone else. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but looking at the evidence spread across his desk, I realized he was right. I'd made this decision unilaterally, without considering what it would mean for him, for our marriage, or even for the child I was carrying. What happens now? I asked. Ewan gathered the papers into neat stacks, his movements precise and controlled. Now you're going to find somewhere else to stay while I decide how to proceed. I've already spoken with an attorney about custody arrangements for Mira and about protecting my financial interests. You're kicking me out? I'm removing myself from a situation where I can't trust anything you tell me. He looked at me directly for the first time since I'd entered the office. I need space to think, and I need to know that you're not continuing to manipulate the situation while I'm trying to figure out my next steps. Ewan, please, I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through it. I love you. Do you? His voice was genuinely curious. Because people who love each other don't usually deceive them about something this fundamental. People who love each other don't make unilateral decisions about creating children with other people. I didn't have an answer for that. In my desperation to have the baby, I'd always imagined I'd lost sight of what love actually meant in a marriage. I'll pack a bag, I said finally. As I left his office, I heard Ewan pick up his phone and dial a number. Paul, it's me. I'm going to need that recommendation for a family attorney after all. I stood in our bedroom, throwing clothes into a suitcase, and realized that my version of honesty had finally rewritten my whole family. The baby I'd wanted so desperately was going to be born into a broken home, and the man I'd married was no longer fighting with me. He was methodically removing me from his life. 3 weeks later, I sat in the waiting room of the family court building, my hands clasped tightly over my now prominent belly. At 23 weeks pregnant, I could no longer hide behind loose clothing or strategic positioning. The baby was real, visible, and about to become the center of a legal battle I'd never imagined. Helena sat beside me, nervously checking her phone every few minutes. She'd been my primary support since Ewan had asked me to leave, letting me stay in her guest room and accompanying me to this mediation session that would determine the immediate future of my family. He'll be reasonable, she said for the third time. Ewan's not vindictive. He'll want what's best for everyone. I wasn't so sure. The man who'd served me with divorce papers and a restraining order preventing me from returning to our house didn't seem like the quietly devoted husband I'd married. This version of Ewan was methodical, strategic, and completely done with my explanations. My attorney, David Marsh, emerged from a conference room down the hall. At 58, he specialized in high-conflict divorce cases, and his expression suggested this qualified. Mrs. Veylin, I need to prepare you for what's about to happen in there, he said, sitting down across from me. Mr. Veylin's attorney has compiled a substantial amount of evidence regarding the deception about paternity. They're seeking full custody of Mira, complete financial separation, and they want you to assume full responsibility for all costs related to the pregnancy and birth. My stomach dropped. Full custody? But I'm Mira's mother. You're also someone who, according to their documentation, engaged in systematic deception that undermines your credibility as a parent. They're arguing that if you can lie about something as fundamental as paternity, you can't be trusted with the child's well-being. Helena leaned forward. That's ridiculous. Lira's been a good mother to Mira for 6 years. That may be true, David said, but family courts take deception very seriously, especially when it involves children and financial fraud. Financial fraud? I asked weakly. You used marital assets to pay for medical procedures without your husband's knowledge or consent. You also potentially exposed him to legal liability through the consent violations at the fertility clinic. His attorney is characterizing this as theft and fraud. The waiting room seemed to spin around me. I'd known there would be consequences to my actions, but I hadn't fully grasped how severe they might be. "What are our options?" Helena asked. "Honestly, limited." David's expression was grim. "The evidence is overwhelming, and Mrs. Veylin's credibility is severely compromised. Our best hope is to negotiate reasonable terms and hope that Mr. Veylin is willing to be generous." A court clerk approached our group. "The mediator is ready for you now." The mediation room was smaller than I'd expected, with a long table surrounded by chairs and fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and clinical. Ewan sat on the far side with his attorney, Patricia Wells, a woman in her 40s, with the kind of sharp focus that suggested she rarely lost cases. Ewan looked different than he had 3 weeks ago. Thinner, more serious, but also somehow more resolved. He glanced at me briefly when I entered, his expression neutral, then returned his attention to the papers in front of him. The mediator, Judge Sarah Hoffman, was a woman in her 60s who radiated the kind of authority that came from decades of handling family disputes. "Let's begin," she said, opening a thick file. "This is a complex case involving allegations of deception about paternity, unauthorized use of marital assets, and questions about the best interests of a minor child. Mr. Veylin, would you like to present your position first?" Patricia Wells stood up. "Your Honor, my client has been the victim of an elaborate deception that goes to the heart of their marriage. Mrs. Veylin used marital funds to undergo IVF procedures with genetic material from her ex-boyfriend, all without Mr. Veylin's knowledge or consent. She then allowed him to believe he was the biological father of the child she's carrying, while continuing to maintain contact with the actual biological father." She placed a thick folder on the table. "We have documentation showing the timeline of deception, financial records proving the unauthorized use of marital assets, and statements from medical professionals confirming the fertility procedures." Judge Hoffman reviewed the papers silently for several minutes. "Mrs. Veylin, how do you respond to these allegations?" I looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. "Your Honor, I made mistakes, but they came from a place of love. My husband and I had been struggling with infertility for years, and I was desperate to give us the family we both wanted. I never intended to hurt anyone." "But you did intend to deceive your husband about the paternity of this child?" the judge asked directly. I couldn't lie anymore. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you did use marital assets to pay for medical procedures without his knowledge?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you did maintain contact with your ex-boyfriend throughout your marriage, including planning and executing this deception with him?" Each question felt like a nail in the coffin of my defense. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Hoffman made notes in her file. "Mr. Veylin, what are you seeking in terms of custody and financial arrangements?" Ewan spoke for the first time since I'd entered the room. "I want full custody of Mira, with supervised visitation for her mother pending psychological evaluation. I want complete financial separation, including responsibility for all debts incurred through this deception. And I want a restraining order, preventing any contact between Mrs. Veylin and myself, except through attorneys." His voice was calm, professional, and completely devoid of the warmth I'd once taken for granted. "Your Honor," David interjected, "those terms are extremely harsh. Mrs. Veylin is pregnant and has limited financial resources. Full custody would be devastating for both her and the child." "The child she's carrying is not Mr. Veylin's responsibility," Patricia Wells responded. "He's under no legal or moral obligation to support the offspring of his wife's affair." "It wasn't an affair," I said desperately. "I never had a relationship with Jonas during my marriage. It was just medical. Medical procedures that you planned and paid for using your husband's money, while lying to him about the nature and purpose of those procedures." Patricia Wells shot back. "The emotional component is irrelevant. The deception and financial fraud are what matter here." Judge Hoffman held up her hand for silence. I'm going to review all the evidence and issue preliminary orders. Mrs. Veylin, I'm deeply troubled by the systematic nature of this deception. You violated your husband's trust, used marital assets fraudulently, and potentially exposed him to legal liability through the consent violations at the fertility clinic. She turned to Ewan. Mr. Veylin, while I understand your anger and sense of betrayal, I want to ensure that any custody arrangements serve the best interests of the child involved. Mira is my primary concern, Ewan said quietly. She's been through enough disruption. I want to provide her with stability and honesty, things that seem to be in short supply in her mother's care. The judge spent another hour reviewing evidence and asking questions. Financial records, medical documentation, timeline spreadsheets, all the evidence of my deception laid out in methodical detail. Finally, she rendered her preliminary decision. Mrs. Veylin, I'm granting temporary full custody of the minor child to Mr. Veylin, with supervised visitation for you on weekends. I'm freezing all joint assets pending full financial disclosure and ordering you to assume responsibility for all medical costs related to your pregnancy. I'm also issuing a restraining order requiring you to maintain a distance of 500 feet from the family home and prohibiting direct contact with Mr. Veylin except through attorneys. The words hit me like physical blows. I was losing Mira, losing my home, losing everything I'd fought so hard to create. Your Honor, please, I said, standing up. I know I made mistakes, but I love my daughter. I love my family. Isn't there some way? Mrs. Veylin, Judge Hoffman's voice was firm, but not unkind. You made choices that have consequences. The court's primary concern is the welfare of the child. And right now, your credibility as a parent is severely compromised. As we filed out of the mediation room, I tried to catch Ewan's eye, hoping for some sign of the man I'd married, some indication that this wasn't really the end. He looked at me once, briefly, and I saw not anger, but something worse, complete indifference. I had become a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. Outside the courthouse, Helena tried to comfort me, but I barely heard her words. I sat on the courthouse steps, one hand on my growing belly, and realized that my version of honesty had finally rewritten my whole family. The baby kicked strongly, as if responding to my distress. This child, the one I'd wanted so desperately, the one I'd been willing to lie and deceive to have, would be born into the wreckage of everything I'd destroyed to create it. A week later, the final divorce papers arrived by certified mail. Ewan had been granted full custody of Mira. I was responsible for all pregnancy-related costs, and our marriage was officially dissolved. The papers were signed, stamped, and final. I sat in Helena's guest room, reading the legal documents that ended my marriage, and understood that the truth about a baby's origins had indeed arrived not in a whisper, but with the seal of the court. I had pushed my husband past the point where he would fight for us, and he had simply, methodically, removed me from his life. The baby I'd always imagined would be born in 3 months, but the family I'd envisioned to raise that child was gone forever.